virtual all candidates meeting. This event is a partnership involving the Chamber, the Lakefield Herald, the Buckhorn Ratepayers Association, and the Buckhorn Community Center. Thank you to everyone who was in the room, the candidates, and to everyone who was watching virtually. I am John Boyko. I will be acting as the moderator. I've been asked to introduce myself. I am an educator and author. I've served on a number of boards and chaired a number of boards, and I grew up in Peterborough, and I've lived for the last 30 years in Lakefield. So that's about me. As a matter of fact, 2 doors down from Michelle in Lakefield. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and the traditional territory of Mississauga and the Chippewa Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Rama, Bolise, Georgina Island First Nations. We respectfully acknowledge that the Williams Treaties First Nation are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. Tonight, we will have 3 sections. We will have the candidates' opening statements, then we will have a question period, and then candidates' closing statements. And I will explain each section as we go on. First, the opening statements. Each candidate will now be invited to offer a 2-minute opening statement. And the order was chosen by lot a couple of minutes ago. Mariam Monset will go first. Joy Lachica will go second. Michelle Ferrari will go second. Joy Lachica will go third. And Paul Lawton, People's Party, will go fourth. The most important person in the room is not any of the people on stage, and certainly not me, but it is Cindy, who is our timekeeper. She is the one with the power. She will, with 15 seconds remaining in the opening statements, 2 minutes, with 15 seconds remaining, she will wave, as she is now, a pink card. That will tell the speaker that you have 15 seconds to wrap up. And then she will hit the bell when time is up. There's the bell. So we would very much like to welcome each of our candidates here. Being a candidate for office takes incredible courage and a lot of hard work. And I just want to, on behalf of all of the people of our constituents, thank all of them for being here today. Shante White of the Green Party sends her regrets due to illness. But I want to include her in this too, to say that the courage and hard work that you are showing and putting in is admirable as a service to our community. So thank each and every one of you. So to begin, Mariam Monsa, you have 2 minutes for your.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for that land acknowledgement, to the Chamber for convening us, and our colleagues at the Buckhorn Community Center for hosting us. I'm asking to be your Member of Parliament for another mandate. It has been the honor of my life to represent Peterborough Kawartha in Parliament, and while we've accomplished a lot of good things, I'm not done giving back. Rural economic development has been a priority for me as a Member of Parliament and as a Cabinet Minister. And during the pandemic, in the hardest of days, my team and I were there for you, and the Government of Canada, under the leadership of Justin Trudeau, were there for you. We were able to support more than 5 million jobs across the country with the wage subsidy. We supported entrepreneurs, small businesses with rent supports, as well as emergency loans. We helped businesses keep going so you could keep powering our local economies. We were able to fill the gaps through investments transferred to Community Futures Development, and I want to take this opportunity to thank all the economic development agencies and champions in our community who stepped up in hard times to make sure that businesses could keep going. We were able to move forward with the largest ever internet investment in rural communities in Canada's history. We were able to support 1 million women and children in their hour of need to find shelter and a safe place to call home when rates of gender-based violence increase in Canada. And I've been able to work with you to protect and create over 3,000 jobs in Peterborough, Kawartha since I've been your MP. There's much more work to do, and on September 20th, I ask for your votes.
Thank you very much. Next, for the 2-minute opening statement, representing the Conservative Party, Michelle.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to everybody who's watching at home. Thank you to my fellow colleagues. And yes, John is right. It does take a lot to do this, so I appreciate the acknowledgement on all of our behalf. My name is Michelle Ferrari. Some of you might know me as Michelle Leahy, born and raised in Durham, Ontario. In fact, my senior kindergarten teacher is in the room tonight. Ms. Dumas. I believe that the Conservative government of Canada does exactly what small communities like Buckhorn, like Trent Lakes, like the Roe-Dummer, like Selwyn, like Curve Lake, like North Kawartha do. And that is, we let you take care of you. And that is our mandate. And we give you the resources and support to do that. Being from here, and actually, fun fact, my very first ever on-camera show was in this building, in this room right here in the Buckhorn Community Center. I've dedicated my life to promoting and supporting this community, and it is an amazing community to be from and to be proud of. But it is run by volunteers, it is run by service organizations, it's run by a heart that unless you know it, you can't describe it. And I think it's really critical that we as a government run with honesty, integrity, and do what we say and say what we need and get to work. You know, let's stop talking, let's start putting some results in place and do some things that need to be done. We need to recover from this pandemic. It has crushed our tourism, it has crushed our small businesses, it has crushed our mental health, and we really need to have a recovery plan, which we do. And I encourage everybody to download it, to listen or to read it. It's 160 pages, comprehensive plan that was released on the very first day of this campaign. And the next question I would leave you with is to ask why. Why are we even in an election right now when we're dealing with this? Thank you.
Bonjour, merci, et miigwech. My name is Joy Lachika. I'd like to thank John Boyko for hosting this evening, the community center here in Buckhorn for having us all, and also the Chamber of Commerce and the Ratepayers who put together this wonderful event, an opportunity to talk about what lies before us. Joy Lachika. I am not from the area like the other two candidates previously have described in the same way. However, this area has been a home to me for almost 20 years. For 18 years, I've had a little property up at Gooderham. So the 507 is a very familiar road to me. And I love land, I love earth, water, sky, air, and the beauty of this area so very much. And so much so that with my family, my partner and our 11-year-old daughter, we decided to move to Peterborough. And we are consolidating our lives here because we've loved it so much over the years. So for the last year I've lived in Peterborough. It's been during a pandemic and it's hard to get to know people in the same way, but I certainly have built some wonderful new relationships. I come to you as a teacher with more than 25 years experience. Intermediate, elementary, grade 7 and 8. I've worked with families, students, community. I've been elected. I've been a political educator. Since 2015, I've been released to be the president of the Elementary Teachers of Toronto, and I've served on the ETFO Provincial Executive. I'd like to be able to share with you how we need to rise from this pandemic with a new Democrat platform. So I thank you for this opportunity tonight, and looking forward to it very much.
Thank you, Joy. Next, from the People's Party of Canada, Paul Lawton.
Thank you. My name is Paul Lawton, and I'm the People's Party of Canada candidate for Peterborough Kawartha. I'm proud to be a Trent University graduate who lives in Peterborough with his wife and 8 children. I ask you in this election to vote for me because the other parties plan to take Canada in the wrong direction, and the only distinction between them is how quickly they will get us there. Other parties all have plans to continue reckless spending that will add to the $1.4 trillion federal debt. The other parties each have their favorite sectors they want to subsidize and bail out, and others they wish to tax out of existence. The other parties continue to pit Canadians against each other through identity politics, and other parties want to continue undue restrictions on your freedom in a misguided attempt to uphold public safety. The PPC platform is based on individual freedom, personal responsibility, fairness, and respect. We have common sense policies that unite Canadians around those principles and put Canadians first while unleashing the potential of the economy and protecting your freedom.
Well, next we move in Lakefield has put out a request for people to send questions to them. And a great number of questions came in. And I took a look at all of those questions, and I have summoned what editorial prompts I have, which is not very much, and was able to bring them down to about 13, 15 questions. What I did was, and the people who sent the questions, if they excuse me, I reworded some of your questions to make them a little more clear, or to amalgamate 2 or 3 people that asked essentially the same thing into one question. So if you don't recognize your question specifically in the wording, trust me that it is there. I have also tried to get on all of the issues that are important to this riding, important to our country, important to the world. Now, how this portion will work is that we will begin in the same order. That is, Marion will go first, and going to Michelle, and then Joy, and then Paul. In that, the question will be directed to them, and that person will get 1 minute to answer. The other people will then get 30 seconds to respond to that question. And then the next time, Michelle will get 1 minute, the person will get 30 seconds. If a person refers to someone else on the stage directly or to that party, then that person has an opportunity for 30 seconds to respond. Okay? So, here are the questions, and the first one going to Marion. Our first question is linked to the climate crisis. And by the way, I love your Blue Jays. Go Jays. They're on a roll. Our first question is linked to the climate crisis. Are you in favor of federal funding to enhance the electricity infrastructure and other measures so as to encourage and accommodate electric vehicles?
Thank you, John. Can you hear me okay? Okay, thanks to our tech crew too. The answer is absolutely yes. We have a climate plan that has been endorsed by economists, by climate experts as being the best climate plan this election. It's going to get us to net zero emissions by 2050. It's going to create jobs. It's going to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, and it's going to enable us to do so in a way that brings communities along who otherwise would not. Locally, we have seen investments in clean tech commons, in the innovation cluster, so that they could support other green initiatives. We've invested in the Green Economy Hub, in carbonics, in Trent University, in Fleming College, in water and wastewater treatment facilities. Curve Lake is getting their clean drinking water. Shovels will go in the ground in the year ahead. And I will also add, for the super nerds watching from Trent University, there is a commitment to investing in freshwater research, which I know many profs there are looking forward to, as well as grad students.
We'll go just down the road, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Innovations like electric vehicles are wonderful, and it's no surprise that they have come entirely from the private sector. The PPC is the only party that's entirely against corporate subsidies, taxing one sector of the economy that we don't favor in order to artificially prop up one that we do. The great thing is that a PPC government would restrict tax requirements and burdens on businesses and allow that kind of technology to be developed and flourished.
Thank you so much. New Democrats have a commitment in place to electrify fleets in urban centers. Absolutely, this is a priority. And we also know that in rural communities, there's been an underservice and a deprioritization of transit over these last few years. And that's why New Democrats actually fought to save the Greyhound routes and why we remain committed to developing a public intercity bus system and to build access to transportation in rural communities as well.
Just for clarification, to the first person who answered.
Or you're simply answering the question. A rebuttal would be if, for example, Marion mentioned you or the Conservative Party directly, you would get a chance to rebut that in 30 seconds. So you're simply giving a chance now to answer the question.
Okay, but then there's another minute as well to answer it after. This is it. Okay, yeah, so we absolutely support, investing in electric cars. It's the way of the future. 100% we're behind that in the innovation and unleashing innovation. And if I had a rebuttal, it would be back to challenge Ms. Monsef on how they have not met any of their targets.
You have 30 seconds now because you were directly mentioned.
We have the strongest climate plan this election. We're moving forward and on track to achieving our Paris targets for 2030 and achieving net zero by 2050. We are giving $5,000 rebates for electric vehicles. We're investing in public transit. Via Rail is going to come through Peterborough, and that's going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I'd encourage my Conservative colleague to focus on the plan that the Conservatives are putting forward, which is going to make pollution free again and actually give incentives to polluters to pollute even more.
So you agree you haven't met any of your targets then?
Okay, next we have the second question, and in line we have Michelle, who will be given 1 minute to answer this, and then we'll go back down the road with everybody getting 30 seconds. This concerns housing. Housing is a complex but vital issue facing Canadians. If you were elected, what specific policies and actions would you advocate to help make it easier for new housing units to come onto the market?
John, great question. I think, government doesn't build houses, and if they tell you they do, they don't. Our job is to create an environment for houses to be built and to support what work has already been put in place, as well as remove the red tape for builders to get the job done. There's a big difference between affordable housing and low-income housing. There's a big difference. And so what we want to do as a Conservative Party of Canada is we want to make sure we're banning foreign investors. We want to increase mortgage rates for young people coming into the housing market. We need to stabilize the housing market so that it's more affordable. And we need to work with people who are able right now who are working to ensure that more houses are put up. And I think that's critical for us to be able to get out of the way and let the supply and demand be met. So right now we have a supply and demand issue, and we need to be able to increase the supply.
30 seconds, Joe.
Thank you. New Democrats are really concerned about the housing crisis. From youth that struggle to find rents that are affordable when they're going to school, to seniors who really struggle to make ends meet with little to no income and pensions that they're on, to find housing for seniors. It's just not enough. We have a commitment to affordable housing, new units that are earmarked for our more vulnerable communities, and we're committed to those new housing projects as we move forward. It's key to basic needs and a secure future for all.
Professor Boyko, may I just, I think there's a little bit of confusion because I think Joy has a minute to respond.
No, just 30 seconds.
For every question?
So what happens is, according to the rules that were given to me, the person who was asked the question has 1 minute. Everybody else then has 30 seconds to answer that question.
John.
If you are directly mentioned, then you get a response.
Okay,
Okay?
that's not what we had, but okay, we're on it.
That's what it says here. Okay. So,
Okay,
Paul.
we'll do what you tell us to.
Okay, thank you. Paul.
Yes, thank you. So despite what some of the other parties would have you believe, there are really only three factors in the housing market, which obviously is a concern for all of us. There's supply, demand, and there's inflation. So a PPC government would cool down the housing market by reducing demand, by reducing the immigration quota from about 450,000 per year to between 100 and 150. We would increase supply by advocating for lowering restrictions at the municipal level for new builders. And we would attack buying power by setting the Bank of Canada inflation target at 0%, as we see it's set to 2 in climate.
Okay.
Thank you. We've made progress in our community with more than 1,700 units of housing built, renovated, or subsidized, but there's much more work to be done. A re-elected Liberal government will address both the supply and the demand side of the equation. We'll invest to make sure that we're building 1.4 million more homes. There's a plan to build another 1,400 units within the municipality of Peterborough, within the city. That's been stuck in process, but there's an accelerator fund for municipalities to move forward with building housing units. We're also going to make it easier for first-time home buyers to purchase their first home. More on that later, I hope.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, Joy, you're first up this time.
Do you support continuing the public funding of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, or would you support plans to reduce the CBC funding or even to privatize the CBC?
Thank you. In 2012, the Conservative government under Stephen Harper made tremendous cuts to the CBC. In terms of the Liberal cuts that have compounded, the job losses and a paring down of the CBC, it's a miracle that we have a public national broadcasting corporation that provides news that is relevant and sound. We're 16th out of 18th amongst the developing countries in funding, 16 meaning low, and it's high time that we reinvest with everything that's on our landscape, with the climate emergency, with catastrophes and all of the political and foreign affairs things that are happening in the world. We need a CBC that is robust and strong and relevant. So absolutely, New Democrats make that commitment.
Very good. Goes to Paul and Miriam and back to Michelle.
A PPC government would defund the CBC. We are, again, not in favor. We are against subsidies and bailouts in every sector of the economy. In particular, state-funded news sources should have no place in a democracy.
All right.
I'd like to correct a misstatement by my honorable NDP colleague. The first thing we did when we formed government was to restore the cuts that the former government had made. And moving forward, a re-elected Liberal government will invest hundreds of millions of dollars to support the CBC, to reduce the reliance on paid advertising. We've seen the reliance that Canadians have on solid, reliable, valid information during this pandemic. And supporting the CBC is key to our sovereignty and key to strengthening our democracy, and a re-elected Liberal government will be there to support it.
Very good. Michelle.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think, what's critical here is to evaluate journalism integrity. Being on both sides of this, working in the public sector and working for a CBC affiliate for years, as well as working in the private sector and social media, I think there has to be an evaluation to make sure that there's a level playing field, that what's being broadcast is nonpartisan, is journalistic integrity. And we need to get back to that, and I think that's a really big piece of this conversation.
Very good. Paul, this is your chance to answer first. Another climate issue relates to our ending our reliance on fossil fuels. You champion legislation to end fossil fuels.
The PPC government would end subsidies in industries that we favor and industries that we don't. The government has no place to artificially prop up one industry or another. However, it's important to note on the issue of fossil fuels, what gets lost in the discussion is that almost nothing else has alleviated more suffering and led to more prosperity around the globe than affordable energy. And insofar as Canada can develop our own natural resources, and use that energy in a cost-efficient way, we certainly ought to continue to do so.
Very good. Now, Marion, and back to Michelle for Detroit.
A re-elected Liberal government will achieve our 23 climate targets by reducing emissions by 40 to 45% of 2005 levels, which is where science says we need to go. We can reach net zero by 2050, and we're going to move forward by capping oil and gas emissions at current levels to ensure that they decline from now on. We'll require half of the new car sales to be zero emissions by 2030. We'll phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies faster, and experts agree that the Liberal climate plan will get us on track to achieving our targets, and the Conservative plan will actually reduce our ability to get there.
Okay, Michelle.
Interesting, as Mark Jacquard, a lead author with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, says the Conservative plan is the most realistic with the achievable emission targets and would cost the least as a percentage of GDP. The other issue we need to have a conversation here about is when you solve one problem, you often create another problem. So what are we doing in terms of unleashing innovation to replace the loss of fossil fuels? We know it's a finite resource. The Conservative Party of Canada is thinking long term and setting up for that as well.
Thank you. The Net Zero Emissions Act, which was just passed, is legally binding, and we need that legally binding document because we've been missing emissions targets over the last 6 years. We need to take swift action. We can no longer continue with fossil fuel subsidies. We need to make a swift transition. We see the wildfires burning from coast to coast, and we see the climate emergency globally. We need to do our part, and we need to do it swiftly, just like Iceland, Denmark, Germany, the countries that are light years ahead and started at the same time we did. Thank you.
Okay, we've gone through one each, and there are a number of questions left that have been sent in. Why don't we give everybody a little bit longer to speak? Would that be okay? You are rushing and you're doing all you can, and I feel for you. There's so much to say. The issues are so complex, and you're trying to squeeze in a minute or 30 seconds. I feel for you. Why don't we ignore whatever they're going to say? I'm pointing now at the organizers. It's just us. Let's do this. I want to give everybody 1 minute to speak, and then if you want to rebut, or if you're mentioned and you've been invited to rebut, let's have 30 seconds. Okay, so Paul, everybody gets a minute to answer this. It begins with you. The pandemic has made clear that access to adequate and reliable broadband is essential. What specific actions do you support to improve broadband and cell service in rural areas?
You're absolutely right that in our new way of working and learning, having reliable high-speed internet at home everywhere, whether it's urban or rural, is critical. There are really two ways to look at this issue to further develop broadband access in rural communities. One is to consider expensive and inefficient government interference, asking the government to pass legislation to require companies to build infrastructure, or we can make the economy attractive enough for private businesses who have the skills and technology to deliver broadband to rural areas. There are companies like ExploreNet, like Starlink, who are doing that now. In the economic environment that we have now, that's already coming, and if we make it even more attractive, that'll only continue to develop.
Thank you. Marion and Michelle.
A re-elected Liberal government will continue to implement our plan, and we put investments in place that are going to mean this Christmas, there will be 435,000 households who didn't have the gift of connectivity last Christmas. They'll have high-speed internet this year. And this Christmas in Peterborough, Kawartha, there will be another 8,700 households with access to high-speed internet. And there will be another 1,300 who will get connected from there on. I'll also add that cell gap has been a priority for our government, and through a partnership with the Eastern Ontario Regional Network, we've been able to invest in partnership with the province of Ontario and our municipal colleagues. We've been able to move forward with that cell gap project, which is going to connect over 100 communities to cell access. Anybody who's driven, particularly along Highway 7 and many other highways, those cell gaps can cost lives. It's a matter of health and safety, but it'll also unleash economic opportunities in our entire region.
Michelle?
Thank you for the question. This is a nonpartisan issue in a lot of ways, where we have to look at supporting these people in these communities. Going to Cordova mines where they don't even have cell service is not acceptable. We are committed as the Conservative Party of Canada to get everybody affordably connected by 2025, and most importantly, to continue to support the hard work that's been done by the county and those around to support them and not take credit for it, as I know they're doing a lot of the work themselves.
Well, thank you. During the pandemic, the big three telecom companies, Bell, Telus, Rogers, they have made billions in dividends to their shareholders as well. The ironic thing is that under the Trudeau government, with the rocket high prices being paid to these tech giants, rural communities have spotty or non-existent access just outside major centers like Peterborough. And, driving north on the 507 around Catchacoma, their internet phone, it's dead. This isn't okay. And under the Liberal government, this has continued, and it needs to be fixed. The New Democrats and Jagmeet Singh will invest in high-speed infrastructure to connect farmers, to connect families, to connect students. This is an equity issue to the technology, the tools, and the services they need. We're committed to that.
Yeah.
I can repeat myself, but I don't think anybody wants that. So.
Sorry. I was watching Michelle lose her microphone. I thought, oh my goodness, there's some sound issues, but they're being dealt with. So,
May I rebut?
now, I was about to ask if anybody would like to have 30 seconds to rebut.
The Liberal government put forward the largest investment in broadband for rural communities in Canada's history. We're committed to connecting every single household to this essential service. The Conservative Party of Canada has invested $0 in their platform to connect rural communities to this essential service.
As soon as Michelle gets her microphone back, she will be able to reply to that. Joy or Paul, anything to add? Michelle now has her microphone back, and here's hoping it works.
Can you hear me now? How about now?
Speak loudly. Those two microphones only work when you speak directly into the top of them.
Okay, how about now? Yeah.
Yep, if you turn it down towards yourself a little bit.
Hi.
Nope.
Hello?
No, you got nothing.
How about now?
Yeah, speak loudly. Just speak loudly.
I think you and I have to yell.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure where Ms. Wanseth has that information, but we are definitely committed to investing in this since we're going to meet the target by 2025. So that's just
It's right there in your platform.
which page?
I will look that up for you. Just give me a moment.
As soon as you know, let me know.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Joy.
I just want to emphasize that, for the investment that's spoken of that has occurred, this is a huge equity issue for rural and Indigenous communities. The fact that there isn't access to high-speed internet, it's an accessibility issue and a lack of access to information, and it needs to be corrected swiftly. It's a reconciliation issue, actually.
Very good. Joy, you begin this round. The question, you mentioned reconciliation. The question is reconciliation. Have you read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action? What will you do as our MP to see that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action are implemented?
Thank you. I certainly have read them, and in my work as a labor leader and as an educator on the Teachers Federation of Ontario, I've begun groups that have to do with the Teachers for Reconciliation. There are only 13 of 94 calls to action that have actually been addressed, and we need to take swift action on it. We know that we need to have a healing path forward, and we need to have Indigenous leaders, elders guiding us and leading us towards a future addressing the climate emergency with their lead, with their knowledge to guide a path forward. We need to have a nation-to-nation relationship, a respect for treaty rights and land issues that have needed to be long addressed. And New Democrats are committed to that deeply. Thank you.
Very good. Let's go the other way. Michelle, and then Mary, and then Paul. Sorry, you've been distracted with the, would you like me to read the question again?
Yes,
Because your
sorry.
microphone has been going back and forth. So I think it's only fair.
Yep, it's not working.
Have you read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action? What will you do as our MP to see that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls for action are implemented?
Yes, I have. Thank you so much. And that was Stephen Harper, government that commissioned the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And through 71 through 76, we will be ensuring that that is committed, and we will be fulfilling that. We will also be funding every investment into all residential schools and making sure that these children are brought home to their parents and caregivers.
Many injustices were committed in the past by the Canadian government towards Indigenous peoples, some of which are still ongoing. We can't rewrite this past, but as some of the other candidates have said, we can seek the best way going forward to live harmoniously. PPC government believes that the relationship must be based on mutual respect and a balanced approach, taking into account the needs of Indigenous communities and the interests of the Canadian population as a whole. PPC is committed to seeking options to replace the paternalistic Indian Act, which keeps Indigenous peoples in a state of dependency and allows the federal government to control most aspects of their lives. We need a new legal framework that guarantees equal rights and responsibilities to Indigenous peoples as Canadians and promotes the self-reliance of communities.
Thank you for your important question. Most of us were at the Curve Lake First Nation debate last night, where we spoke in depth about our commitments and the community's priorities. We worked across government with our partners so that 80% of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to actions involving the Government of Canada are now complete or well underway. We're working with residential school survivors, Indigenous peoples, provinces, territories, and educators to incorporate Aboriginal and treaty rights, the history of residential schools, and Indigenous contributions to school curricula. We introduced Bill C-15, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which became law of the land this past June. Our Conservative colleagues voted against that. We've built and refurbished almost 200 schools. We've lifted 109 World Water Advisories, and we prevented 188 short-term boil water advisories from becoming long-term boil water advisories. And we move forward to implement with $2 billion the MMIWG calls for action.
Thank you very much. Any rebuttal to anything any of the others have said? Here. Oh, Michelle.
I don't have a rebuttal, but I think we can all agree at this table that this is an nonpartisan issue and we want to move forward with reconciliation. I'm going to yell because my mic isn't working.
Can we share mics and like scrub them with something?
I've got 95% alcohol.
Because that's not fair.
Yeah,
We
I
should be able to
apologize.
hear you.
That mic we switched out.
We switched the mics and now that one's still not working in that zone. I don't understand.
Do you want mine?
I'm used to yelling. I'm a mother. It's fine. Can you hear me at home?
Okay.
What's the
we'll just continue
response?
to yell then, I guess.
Are you
Okay.
able, so can I ask, are you able to confirm whether people at home can
Yeah.
hear?
Can they
Michelle?
hear Michelle when she's talking without
They
the
can
mic?
hear when she yells.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm keeping the volume up.
He's keeping the volume up on you. Sorry, guys. That's
Okay.
like dead zone for some reason.
Okay.
With apologies for the sound problem. Number 7, Michelle, you get to yell the first answer to this question. Our community relies a great deal on tourists visiting our area, and many of those tourists find accommodation in short-term rentals. What can the federal government do to address the fact that short-term rentals hurt our resort owners, who, unlike those offering short-term rentals, are employers, must pay commercial taxes, and abide by dozens of health regulations and safety regulations?
Thanks for the question, John. And I'm going to read an elephant in the room and in between the lines. And I think what we're primarily talking about here is Airbnbs. And I think what needs to be addressed is that the playing field needs to be leveled. Full stop. You know, if somebody's going to have an advantage over somebody else who's been in the industry for a lot longer, it's just not fair. And we need to be ensuring that property owners are taking care of their property and that the rules are the same across the board. The only example I can give this to you is when I went into social media. It was a wild, wild west at the time. And then we slowly had to develop rules, transparency on sponsorships and ads. The same thing needs to be done with Airbnbs to level the playing field, to make sure that our existing hotels, bed and breakfasts, and tourist destinations are not hurt as a result of that.
Very good. 1 minute each, beginning with Joy, and then down the road.
Thank you. It really is a complex issue. Being a second property owner, bylaws are really important, and respect for bylaws, municipal bylaws, are important. And we can make sweeping statements about people who rent and people who own and how they may or may not behave. We need to be respectful of our community. But absolutely, there needs to be some regulation on things like Airbnb, because there are extremes, and we need to address the extremes. We all care about our own properties if we own them, and we certainly need to listen to one another and share from municipality to municipality the best practices. And I think jurisdictionally, this isn't so much a federal issue, but we do need to have probably some provincial weigh-in on this so that there's some consistency across the board.
Very good.
Thank you. I think the comment that there should be a level playing field is entirely right, and I don't think anyone would argue with that. But if we think a little deeper about the issue, what has impacted the tourism industry over the last 2 years, that is provincial lockdowns. So we need a federal government in Ottawa that will advocate against further provincial lockdowns and restrictions to allow the tourism industry to recover and to grow. And what might impact the tourism industry going forward is the idea that that renters that either renting out a second residence or owners of businesses, tourism businesses, will have to check vaccine information at the door, and that they'll be allowed to rent to vaccinated Canadians and not allowed to unvaccinated Canadians potentially. So we need a federal government that will advocate against both of those measures.
We did introduce a tax in budget 2021 that'll come into effect later this year. The tourism sector is a key contributor to jobs and economic growth in our region, and a re-elected Liberal government is going to support sectors like tourism with temporary wage and rent support until next spring. And we're going to offer them 75% of their expenses to get them through to the winter. Additionally, there are billions invested in supporting the tourism sector, and we all know that arts, culture, and heritage is also a really important part of the tourism sector. To an earlier question, John, about where in the Conservative Party of Canada's platform is broadband mentioned, on the last page where the costing is outlined, there is 0 line items for broadband connectivity for rural Canada.
Okay.
Okay, audio's back.
But not on the full panel.
Okay,
When you're on
okay,
this
I'm
camera.
not gonna go into that, I'm not
So
gonna
we're
go
not
into
going
that.
on that camera
Okay.
anymore.
Okay,
Thank you.
audio's back, thank
You
you.
should make it good scene.
Okay,
All right.
for all of those at home, I can tell you that we are having audio troubles all night long, as you can tell, Michelle's microphone and other things that are happening. And the audio apparently cut out in the middle or before Paul could finish or even perhaps begin his statement, so we'll allow Paul to say what he said again, so we make sure everybody heard.
Great, thank you. And just the topic was tourism, right? And I was just commenting on our MP mentioned that the Liberal government would support tourism workers and businesses with temporary wage supports. And the business owners I know, resort owners, small business owners in every sector, do not want temporary wage supports. They do not want bailouts and subsidies. They want to be free to do what they do best, which is to provide a service at a good price, provide jobs for others by doing so. It sounds nice to the ear to say the government will support this and support that and invest in this, but the Canadian worker, Canadian entrepreneurs want to be free to generate revenue on their own without the government restricting them.
Okay, Miriam, you were directly mentioned in that, so.
I'm doing ask.
Now the video is frozen.
Hope it's frozen on my good side.
It is. You look amazing. It is frozen on you from before.
Nobody's ever said that before.
You look great. Amazing has a lot of just, you know.
No, that's true. That's a broad semantic range.
Oh dear. Some days you get all the gremlins.
You thought we had a tough job?
Yeah.
When you said she was the busiest in the room, I'm like, I think this poor guy is.
I'm so sorry about this.
It's all good, hun. It's all good. It's not you're not doing this on purpose. If you are, then please apologize.
Okay,
So,
it's showing the video there, but it's not showing up here.
and that's the broad cam that doesn't work.
You're actually looking really
Well,
I'm gonna move it to a different person so you get a different.